Hey guys, my name's Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So, sorry I didn't get a video out last week. FL Chen was sick, so yeah. But anyway, let's get into today's video. So today's video we are talking about note timings. I think I covered a tiny bit about it before, but we're going to get into just a little bit more of it. So, essentially, I'm going to open the piano roll here, and what we have is we have what's called a whole note. And you'll notice here at the top here we have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. And a whole note is when you get a note here and just run it all the way from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 or somewhere anywhere, but it's about that length. So the important thing is kind of like the length, but not in some senses, because for instance, if I do this and then this right there, that's a whole note spacing, even though it's not the full length of a whole note. So a little bit confusing there, but just keep that in mind. So sometimes I'm going to say whole note and I'm going to mean the actual length of the note. Other times I'm just going to mean the spacing. So just keep that in the back of your head. So what happens with this whole note here is actually this whole note is also called a bar, and we could split this up into different things. So if we split this up in half, our whole note becomes a half note. Funny how that happens, you know? And if we split it in half again, we get a quarter note. Now, the reason I skipped over half note, and I'm going to talk more about quarter note, is because half notes don't really have that much purpose. I mean, you'll use them a lot, but they don't have much significance per se. But the quarter note, on the other hand, is very important. You'll notice here that we have these big black or darker bars, I should say, not exactly black, they're kind of blue. But we have those dark blue bars there, and then we have in between, we have these ones that are slightly darker than the other ones, you'll notice. That's because these are quarter notes. The quarter notes are also called beats. So we have up at the top of the project our beats per minute, which is right now 138. And what we could take away from that is we have 138 beats per minute or 138 quarter notes per minute. So quarter notes are pretty important in terms of EDM. Also because the kick drum will pretty much always be having a quarter note spacing. So you have the kick drum, and then a quarter note later you have the kick drum again, and then again and again. And it just follows that very standard pattern. And you kind of see things line up a bit better if I add another quarter note. So you see this lines up directly with this. So you kind of see the spacing here is exactly identical to these ones here that we use for programming in drum patterns. I think I talked a lot about just the standards for drum patterns. You'll notice that this is pretty typical to what a drum pattern is. So we have, the kick on every quarter note, and then you have a clap and a snare kind of stacked for every other kick, which you'll notice now there's a half note between them because we have a quarter note here and a quarter note here. So there's a half note between them, even though it's not starting on the first beat there. It's still a quarter note spacing. So just keep that in mind. And then the hi-hat, you kind of do all kinds of fun things with it. If we listen to this here, I'm going to delete these. Listen to this pattern. When I was putting this in, I literally just highlighted all of these and then randomly, pulled some ones out. So that's basically all I did to create it, because hi-hats are pretty flexible in that regard, and FL Studio makes it really easy to work with hi-hats and creating hat loops and stuff like that. So have fun in my voice just went weird. Have fun in FL Studio with that. So those are the basics for drums, and you could tell here for the most part, other than the hi-hats, we have pretty standard stuff and pretty simple stuff. Like the timings aren't all that weird. But when we start getting into like chord progressions, we'll want a lot more flavor, I guess is the way to say it. So we're going to go to this pattern here. And this is a chord progression that I made in about less than 2 minutes. And it's pretty easy because you'll notice that our first note is A. And if you look at this chord, you could probably tell it's an A minor chord. And going off of that, that probably means we're going to be in the A minor scale. A minor scale is all the white keys. So then we just can create chords based off of white keys now, and you'll notice here things line up and we don't have any black keys. So that's just an easy way to start keying stuff in really fast. Go for A minor or C major because both of those scales have all the white notes. So now the interesting thing is not so much what I did with the chords, because this is just like I said, A minor sus4, which I briefly mentioned how to make those. And then this is a G major And then this is actually a little bit of a weird chord because it is a inverted C major chord. So if we select these bottom ones here and move them up an octave, then you'll notice here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is a 7-note difference. So that means that we're going to have a major chord here, but it is an octave lower. This particular note is an octave lower, just so that the inversion fits more in the chord progression here. You'll notice it kind of, they're in the same general area. So that's why I did that inversion, because otherwise, if I were to have it up here, it'd be a little bit higher than I want it to be. So I kind of wanted it to keep down there. So that's why I did those. That's why I chose those chords. But for the sake of this video, the timing is more important. So what did I do with the timing? Well, I actually did a weird sort of note. And that's what you'll find when it comes to plugging in chord progressions and melodies. You'll want to do something a little bit, I guess, not standard is the way to put it. So you'll notice here that instead of having like a quarter note or an eighth note, I actually have something a little bit weird. So a eighth note is like that. A quarter note is like this. Right now, I have it instead of like those two right there, I have it in between, you'll notice. And what that comes out to end up being is an eighth note plus a 16th note, which I believe is called a dotted eighth note. I don't remember for sure. But when you add a dot, I believe it just adds half of that note. So if you have a dotted quarter note, it's like a quarter note plus a eighth note. If you have a dotted 16th note, then it's a 16th note plus a 32nd note, which you don't see much of. Pretty much just in snare builds when you'll see 32nd notes. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to have. And this particular spacing makes for amazing chord progression. So if you listen right now, so it's a very nice sounding chord progression, and it kind of sounds like I don't know the way to phrase it, but it's doesn't sound bad. It kind of sounds monotonous, but not really in a terrible way. It more of just sounds like a very standard chord progression. There's nothing too amazing about it, but it still sounds good. That's because this is one of the patterns that's used a lot, and if you don't hear this whole pattern in some tracks, what you'll actually hear is you'll hear portions of it in the section of a chord progression, and that's because this dotted eighth note is a very, very common note timing that you'll find in melodies and chord progressions and stuff. Even if it's not in a lot of your, even if it doesn't sound all that normal, it still is something that's used quite a bit. As opposed to something like quarter notes, which sounds very normal, but you actually don't use a lot of quarter notes when you're making melodies and chord progressions, because they tend to be a little bit too widely spaced in some cases. Now, that's not to say you don't use them at all and they sound bad. It's just you won't find yourself using those as much as you will using something like this dotted eighth note. So, and please forgive me if I am using the wrong terminology for that one. I didn't bother to look it up because, quite frankly, the names aren't all that important, because usually I don't talk about the notes. What I'll usually do is I'll just start plugging something in and adjusting it to until it sounds good. Similarly, so let's drop this in here. This is what it sounds like when we put the drums with it. So it actually sounds okay. And then lastly, I could get the other pattern I made here, which is a lead. And this lead follows the exact same note progression as the, no, not exactly the exact same note progression as the chords here. It follows the same timing. So you'll notice here we have the dotted eighth, and that just kind of goes until we have two eighth notes that are butted right up against each other. And that's what we're going to have in this lead here. So if we go to lead, it's the exact same thing. Dotted eighth notes, and then right here we have, although it goes up, we still have the eighth note. And you'll notice I did adjust the length of these a little bit. But that's because I have a glide on this particular synthesizer, so I want it to glide how I want it to glide. And I need gaps or extra long notes for that. So we'll listen to this with a pattern, and this is what it sounds like. How did I choose the notes? Well, literally, I just kind of punched in some things. I was messing around on my keyboard, and I listened to some of those things, and I kind of came up with ideas, and just started keying in the notes as my ideas flowed. So really, there wasn't a lot of decision into which notes were chosen. I just made sure that they were in key. So remember, I said that was very important, making sure things are in key. So all I did was, made sure the notes were in key, and then I just kind of punched them in. And I followed the pattern of this chord progression just to make things easier, to show you guys that, if you follow that and you just change where the notes are in a kind of interesting sense, then you'll get a melody that doesn't sound like it's just following the chord progression. It'll sound like it's doing its own thing. And I could even add like not add random notes, but I can move like the middle note to here and it'll sound like this. And I can maybe move this one here. And really all I'm doing is just checking to make sure things are in keys. Things are in keys. Things are in key. Sorry, I've had a long week. But it really there's a lot of flexibility. And if you just move these things around, then you'll find some very interesting things that you could do. Additionally, we could just move around notes as well. And then come up with even more interesting things because they contrast with our chord progression. And then I'm going to shorten these ones to about that long. And then slide this one to be a bit longer. Forgot to get rid of that note. Yeah, I don't think I like that, but oops, let me do this correctly. Got another one there. So you can see I'm already doing tons of interesting things, and really I'm just messing with the notes. I'm not using a lot of the note timing theory that I was talking about before, about the mathematical stuff. And the reason is because you need to focus a lot less on the maths and the theory, and focus more on getting something that actually sounds good to your ear. Like I said, that's where breaking the rules comes in. If you end up breaking rules in terms of note timings or note placements, as long as it sounds good, it doesn't matter. These rules are here to kind of give you an idea of what's been tried and true to work for most cases. And if you go out of those, you get some even better things. But you just kind of need to listen for your ear with your ear. Ugh, I cannot talk straight. You just need to listen closely for the things that you think sound good. That's the most important part. And like I said, staying within the bounds is a great way to get pretty good sounding things really fast. Like I said, by staying in key here, most of the notes that I just drop in randomly are going to sound good. And it's just up to me to, adjust the timing or adjust the pitch a little bit to get it so that it, sounds even better. And sometimes, who knows, I may go out of key and it'll sound totally amazing. So it's really all up to you. And there's a lot of experimentation. Mostly the reason I told you the note timings was because for drums, it's particularly important. Additionally, I did mention that we have bars, and I'll talk about later when it comes to song structure, but you'll notice that bars play a lot bigger picture in terms of the general layout of your track as a whole. So we'll count things in most cases, we'll actually count in bars of 8. So you'll have something like this is 4 bars. That's actually a little bit short. So usually you'd want something that's about 8 bars, and then what you'd use is use this 8-bar pattern, and then you'd have it again, except you change something up this time. So you have generally the track stays the same throughout this 8-bar loop, and then you change something so it's different in this next 8-bar loop. That's generally how song structure actually works. If you want a little bit of insight into that early. So yeah, that's important as well. But like I said, even though I was kind of talking about theory at the beginning, and I did mention, at the beginning I was also talking about the timing of these notes, and I said I really didn't care what the note name, the timing was called, because quite frankly, you end up doing a lot more of this sort of poking around and moving things around instead of thinking, I need to do an 8th note next, I need to do a 16th note next. You kind of just move things around, shimmy them around, and get them to fit so that they're how you want them. But anyway, that's all the time I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you want to. Feel free. But otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video.